Are you recording? Shall I get going?
Yeah, I've hit record.
Right. Well, I shall start then. Obviously, we're having our Monday Connect today on Tuesday. Hopefully, everybody had a nice bank holiday weekend, extra day off. We do have Liz and Kevin with us today. Hopefully, Laura will be joining us. Nick will be marshalling, and I shall be doing most of the chatting. As Malcolm, as many of you, some of you might be aware, he's actually attending the International Association of Assessing Officers conference in Chicago at the moment, which he's described as being like the IRRV, but much bigger in America. So hopefully everything.
And for some reason with the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, for some reason. I think he's having fun out there. So I'll get started. Today we're not going to be touching on the BEC stats. I'll leave that for Malcolm to pick up next week. I think what we are going to be talking about in a bit with the cost of living. I think BEC stats might be interesting over the next month or two to see what sort of impact we get on benefit claimant numbers, as there's a few sort of cliff edges coming up in people's lives. What I'll start with is we can get Kevin. Oh, sorry about that. The button. Can't see my pointer. To start with the council tax and business rates. He says.
Okay, don't think this will take long because I don't think much has happened in respect of council tax or business rates. Obviously, for council tax, collection continues. It'd be interesting to see what the impact of the job furlough ending on the 30th of September 2021 will have on the collection rates and also on our benefit levels. And I noticed a few weeks ago the DWP did upgrade through their StatsX Explore the UC figures, and I noticed a downturn in universal credit in the months of April and May this year. So that's quite interesting figures. On the business rate side, still no news on the MCC appeal reliefs. Parliament isn't back yet, and that's still to go through, and that will need to be updated with the local discretion schemes, but we haven't even got anywhere near guidance yet, let alone anything else, so that would take time. We are enforcing those debts. We've finished completely at grants at Mid Sussex. We've still got the reconciliations to do, and I noticed that the BIS are still chasing up people local authorities for reconciliations from the small business grants and the original discretionary grants. I think the closing date is the 17th of September for those. And we've got reconciliations for the other ones as well coming through as well. Some authorities are still paying additional restrictions grant, and some didn't claim the top up because they didn't spend the original additional restrictions grant. But please note the guidelines changed and the rules changed so much during the process that it's quite understandable that some would fail to pay it. The other thing is expanded retail discount and nursery discount. We have got a huge downturn in the numbers applying. We're making them go through an application form, an online application form, and particularly with the cash cap. We've had over 50 businesses no longer want it. They've opted out, and the numbers applying are about 40% of last year. And talking to neighbouring authorities, they've got similar sort of figures to us. So it'd be interesting to see. That means we've got to collect more money off these organisations, and we have already seen a downturn in the business rates collection rate. I don't know what the rules will be next year. It'll be interesting to see. A manifesto commitments 50% to retail relief, not to leisure and hospitality, but COVID has just changed the landscape left, right and centre. So obviously we're going to have to wait and see what happens with this and deal with it accordingly. Happy to take questions. Nothing further to say at this stage, Jake.
Do we have any questions? I
have a question, but it's more to do with the end of furlough in Kevin's area than anything else. I mean, by that Mid Sussex. I mean, I am right in thinking that Gatwick has a large effect on your working population.
I think the last figures that was out, the average was 6%, and we were running at 7%. So yes, we will get impacted by Gatwick. It'll be interesting to see if that means that added benefit figures. Because obviously just because you lose your job doesn't mean you necessarily qualify for benefit. But there will be little interludes like that will impact upon our services going forward, I'm sure.
Because as I understand it, the percentage of people still on furlough, or the higher percentage of people still on furlough, are in relation to travel and hospitality.
I'd agree. Crawley's a prime example of that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out over the next 6 months.
Surprisingly, by the way, the numbers that have come down on job furlough haven't really been represented in benefit figures and debt figures, etc. So, but I think so far that would be from what I've seen. But I think this last 7% are going to be the hardest to crack nut, and I think they will have an impact upon the figures and the debts going forward.
Right. As I said, we're going to be keenly looking at our stats over the next couple of months to see what sort of effect the final end of furlough will have on people claiming. Perfect storm, perhaps, is a word. Well, if there's no other questions, we'd move on to discussing more to do with the actual cost of living and these different cliff edges that we've got coming up. We've got a section on the cost of living. 3 sections here that Malcolm's generated for us. The first one, we'll start off with the energy prices. As we know, energy bills will be increased by at least £139 for some 15 million households from October. This is literally the 1st of October. The Ofgem has announced that they can go up. This increase, the increases are always because of a rise in wholesale energy prices. Usually every year I'll be banging on about the fact that they never seem to go down when wholesale energy prices go down. But we can see customers' default direct debit tariffs are going up quite high. There's going to be an average about £1,277 a year, while prepayment customers obviously pay even more. But interestingly, this year Ofgem has said that across the sector, the profit margin on energy is actually 0 right now. Companies are making what it costs them to sell the energy. And I think that the main message that Ofgem is sort of pushing out there is an important message for customers, just actually to find out if they're on the right tariff. There's not a lot else you can do other than look for a better tariff, or make sure that you're not on some kind of bog standard tariff from many years ago that gets uprated. I mean, it's when you take into account the fact that as we can mention, the UC top-up scheme's ending, furloughs ending, these energy bills are going to hit people quite hard. We did then, I mean, I'm not sure what sort of effect you're all going to notice with the energy price going up. But we have had some discussion on the WhatsApp group, which we called Living Rents, where there's been a couple of articles by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation recently about the effect of the UC and working tax credit top up, how that's going to affect people. And when you roll in the fact that energy prices are going up, we have one of our members, I'm not sure if they're actually on the chat with us today, saying that they've been, a housing association, I believe, have actually been working with the National Energy Action Energy Poverty charity in order to deliver top-up vouchers to their tenants, then spending themselves £12,000 in the last year. And this is the point that I'm sort of bringing us around to, with the energy, the end of furlough, the UC top-up, all happening at the same time. It seems to be a bit of a disaster waiting to happen. And that comment, I quite like the comment at the end there, where a recent meeting with the DWP, and that the DWP have resolved to put a message, read the end of top-up in their statements. But you do wonder how many vulnerable claimants will actually be reading their statements. And we have this housing association literally sending out 1,500 texts a couple of weeks ago to UC claimants, and sadly most of them had no idea what was coming up. Which brings us on really to a general discussion about inflation, which hopefully Liz has a few points to mention on here. But we have the Obr Predicted Inflation. It's going to increase to 2%, they say. However, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research say it's going to be up to 3.9% by early next year. And Malcolm's put in a little note there saying bringing it in line with the USA, which is currently at 4.2%. As our economies are sort of quite tied together, we do tend to follow the American model. So once the price increases that we get from importing all sorts of services and goods, especially digital services and goods across the pond, it's going to see very high levels of inflation by early next year. I mean, we've got a few graphs here, but Liz, have you got some points that you'd like to bring in about inflation?
Well, yes, I have, but it's my idiot's guide to what I think is happening at the moment in relation to inflation and how it affects us. By idiot, I mean I'm the idiot, not the audience. It's a complex area, and I don't actually pretend to have any knowledge really about economic strategy. But as I see it at the moment, what is causing the inflationary pressures are more than two things. There's shortages in the labour market, which is actually inflating wages. As we've seen, the ministers are quite keen to say, well, wages are rising. Well, they are, but they're only rising because there is a shortage of labour in the market. That has led to shortage of goods, which means that those that can afford to buy are paying higher prices because there's a shortage. I was watching today, there was on the news, there was a hop farmer who actually cannot pick hops because of the shortage of labour. And consequently, what she was saying was that the model that we had before, and I'm not going to blame this all on Brexit, but the model that we had before where people could come in, they would take, they're not actually, this particular firm is paying decent wages, I think 12 to 15 pounds an hour. They come in for a short period of time and they go back. But currently they can't get the hops to where they need to be. So consequently, the cost of beer will probably go up. And that seems to me what is causing principally the inflation problems at the moment. And actually that is related to the work that we do, because there are certain things we might be able to help in relation to that. The other pressure, of course, is something I don't really understand, which is printing money to service our increasing debt, which adds also to inflationary pressures. If inflation continues to increase, the withdrawal of the £20 pandemic increase will very, very quickly turn into a real and biting cut in income. So we have that. We have the inflationary pressure in food and drink, the inflationary pressure in energy prices, everything going up. Retaining the increase would have at least mitigated, in small part, the effect of inflation. But it would have increased borrowing and the need to continue to print money, creating further inflationary pressure. I'm only saying this because it gives a flavour of the, well, I suppose the difficult decisions that have to be made, but it does seem to me that there is some sort of, it always seems to affect those people who are poorest. So what are going the effects of inflation, as far as we're concerned? Potentially there's an increase in indebtedness, which is already high. A potential increase in mortgage costs, leading to increase in rents. Potentially, if it gets higher and higher, you can see the PRS sector diminishing because people will get out of it because there is no return. And of course, from our point of view, the inability for people to pay the debts that affect us, such as collection rates, increase in LA outstanding debt because people can't pay or they can't pay as quickly as they could have done, increased pressure on DHP budgets. The interesting part is the fact that unemployment is not as high as it was projected. It was projected to be about 12% and it's actually only at 4%. Which also means that there is pressure on the labour market because that labour that the government seem to think is readily available is not as readily available as they thought it might be. So in a rather nasty twist, the end of furlough, if it increases unemployment, actually could have a depressing effect on inflation by that coming down. Fairly depressing effect on everybody else, but it could have a depressing effect on inflation.
A depressing silver lining to the cloud.
Yes, well, it's all swings and roundabouts. When you look at it, it's quite fascinating, really.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. I suppose this is where this is open for discussion, insofar as what is it that we can do that can actually help in some of these areas in relation to council tax collection, in relation to paying debts, and in relation to the DHP.
It's going to be tough time coming up.
I mean, I have a few areas that I think might be looked at. One is actually if authorities do not have a coordinated debt recovery system in place, they are going to struggle, because you are always going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul in local authority terms. And also, I think in the creation of council tax support schemes.
To be quite creative.
Well, yes, to take. I mean, I think we have to get to the point at some point where we have to accept that some people will not be able to pay.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of the articles I've seen from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation recently, it really is a perfect storm. If you take 20 quid a week off of people at the same time their energy bills are going up, I mean, there's no chance that rents are going to be coming down in the near future. You know, there's been a massive slew of house sales during the pandemic, which has driven up prices. You know, only really tiny accommodation seems to be coming down.
And if mortgage costs increase, that's another pressure on rent.
Yeah, we've seen sort of. Oh, no, we've only just gone through that period where people couldn't get evicted as well. So you've even got pressure on landlords that haven't been able to collect rent for a while, so possibly wanting to put their rents up just to make up the money that they've not made over.
And you know, increased mortgage costs may mean that people landlords get out of the market altogether, thereby, you know, exacerbating an already crisis in the housing market or housing supply.
A lot more DHP applications are coming through where people are asking for assistance with not just with paying a shortfall on any rent if they've been sort of capped, but a lot more people writing out that their energy bills have gone up, so they do actually need a bit of extra money. I mean, how do we all think this is going to? Is there any way of predicting how it's going to affect us now? Well, we're all pretty sure that there is going to be an effect across benefit claimants and for council tax collection and recovery.
I think if we all knew the answer to that, we'd be probably in a better position than what we are. I think it's if you can forecast the future with what happens, because I think COVID rates will continue to go up when the schools go back in England. They've already done in Scotland. I think it's going to be the impact is going to be interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, as you said, the figures they've released recently after the Scottish schools went back. I mean, are we going to get back into the situation shortly where bars and are be having to close because everybody's actually off with COVID? The supermarket shelves are empty.
I personally can't see that happening, because whilst the numbers are going up, the vaccination record is so good that generally, I'm not saying in all cases, generally people aren't being hospitalised or the deaths are not as high as they were at one stage. So hiding behind that, I can see. I think there will still be controls on people going into various things. I know they were talking about nightclubs and having tests, etc., and sporting events as well. I just come from a major sporting event this weekend where, even though they don't have to, they still insisted that people did lateral flow tests before coming in and showing proof of that. So I think that will continue for some time yet.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, I think, but again, the labour shortages are probably also there in relation to people being pinged, as they say. I mean, okay, there are certain categories that do not have to self-isolate, but it's still a bit of a problem.
Definitely, we have the haulage sort of.
That's what I mean, yeah.
recently been calling for their workers to be given special status because once they get pinged, obviously apparently it takes at least 9 months to train up new workers into that. Obviously they need to get their HGV licenses, etc. So there's a built-in lag there of just one sort of area of employment.
Well, from my recollection, quite a long time ago, but probably going back as far as 2008, I mean, there were plenty of jobs in relation to HGV drivers 1 and 2, but actually it also costs quite a lot of money to train, money which is not forthcoming from, or wasn't at the time, from job centre. There was no help available. So if you were on job seekers allowance looking for work, you could get a job very probably as a lorry driver 1 or 2, but you would have to pay the cost of training.
Yeah, I mean,
so people didn't do it. So most of the jobs available, you can say there were jobs available, but they weren't really available because it was too costly for people to train from coming off job seekers allowance.
The government recently been talking specifically about hauliers, about how there are apprentice schemes, for instance, so that a company can get several £1,000s back if they hire and train up somebody to drive their HGVs. But still, it's going to take 9 months, and then
yeah, exactly.
And you're relying on a company that's possibly struggling at the moment because they can't actually get enough work because they haven't got enough HGV drivers on their books to spend 9 months spending money and training people. In order to hopefully once they get out of this 9-month period, they'll have enough people to drive their goods, but they might go out of business in the meantime. There's no short-term solution, is there?
Well, there was a bus driver on the radio, actually, a London bus driver, who was saying, well, actually, we go through the same training as HGV drivers, but we're not allowed to swap over without, I can't remember whether it was a cost or not. And at the end of the conversation, they said, well, OK, won't that lead to a shortage if that happens, if these rules are relaxed and you can swap over to drive, HGV class 1? What's going to happen to, the transport system? And actually his answer to that was, well, if they offer us more money, they'll have to offer us more money and we'll stay. So, there it is, inflation encapsulated.
Exactly. We have some sort of longer term figures here that Malcolm's provided for inflation over sort of the last 12, 15 years. And right at the very end there, you can see there's just this massive uptick. Inflation, although recently come down slightly, and as Malcolm said, sort of early next year, we might be seeing sort of levels where it's getting close to the top of this graph.
Yep. And of course that has an effect on all of us.
Yeah, all of us.
But yeah, Lynn's got a hand up. I think she'd like to say something.
Please, Lynn, join us.
Hi there. The 2 points that I picked up on what you were speaking about, Liz, is one about the shortage in the labour market. Do you think that with the end of furlough, where people will potentially lose their jobs because they're no longer in a position to get help from the government, etc., do you think that that will increase the labour market? And the other comment that I had was there was an article again on the news over the weekend where quite a few firms have started using transit vans rather than big lorries so that they can employ people, because obviously that doesn't require the same training as HGV.
Yes, I think as this woman hop grower was saying, I mean, their problem is, of course, that unemployment isn't as high as it was predicted to be. So really what she's saying is that if somebody wanted a job as a hop picker, it's seasonal to start off with, and basically people would have to move from where they are to where the hops are, and people are not prepared to do that. But the more, it sounds awful, but I guess, yes, the more people who are unemployed, the easier it is to stem the labour shortage.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading recently as well. One of the one farmer was explaining that seasonal workers would often pop over in the summer to do fruit picking, hop picking, etc. But then there's a ready-made market straight after that as we get towards the tail end of the year, where they go into warehouse work and sort of get ready for the massive demand that Christmas will provide. So presumably, if you've not got the hot pickers turning up now, come October, November, when we all start ordering our toys to get delivered for Christmas, there's also going to be another shortage of workers there, unless, and sadly, the unemployment rate goes up massively.
At least toys can be delivered in transit vans.
Thank you both.
Quite innovative.
But
yes, I mean, anything that anybody can do to. But then again, I mean, everything has a cost, doesn't it? I mean, if we have all these transit vans nipping about the country, well, that is not perhaps what we want for climate change. That doesn't, it's trying to square the circle, isn't it? Really?
Add to price increases as well, because obviously you can't fit as many packages in a transit.
Exactly.
The cheapest way of getting things up and down the country would be to stick them in a massive lorry and drive up and down the motorways. But and obviously there's also stories out there that I'm sure we've all heard where companies are paying a premium in some areas where they're desperately trying to get drivers and offering them £500, an extra £1,000. All those extra costs are going to have to come. And
all adding to inflation.
And all adding further to inflation. It does look quite scary. I mean, the amount of money being reduced in UC and working tax credit, it's as a percentage of your income for sort of vulnerable families, it's actually reducing their income by over £1,000 a year. It's quite a large reduction. I mean, the latest article I read from JRF that they published last week was analysing the number of families that are going to be affected by this reduction in UC and working tax credit. And I remember reading Bradford West, they reckon that 82% of working age families with children will be affected. 8% in one sort of constituency. And look down all the tables, it's looking like at least 50% of working age families with children in each of these sort of 400 odd constituencies that they got figures for are going to be seeing quite a decrease in their income. They're going to be obviously seeing an increase in energy just as the cold season comes in.
So really, when you think about it, the government have two factions of society to look after. They're red wall gains and pensioners, because actually they're voting.
Well, a lot of the red wall gains have been mentioned by JRF. Perhaps I'll see if I can find the link and post it in our chat or in the WhatsApp. But yeah, a lot of the red wall gains are obviously areas that traditionally
are going to suffer.
Yeah, really going to suffer. It'd be interesting to see how happy they are with the government after this all happens. And I mean, going back to that point, and also a lot of people on, as mentioned earlier, universal credit literally aren't aware, unless you're watching the news or reading messages that the DWP is sending to you on your online sort of account. It's all going to suddenly hit you.
Yes, because I think sometimes, we all think because we're aware of it, and because most of the people we interact with in our daily, in our daily lives and in our jobs are aware that the £20 increase is going to go and what it means. We tend to think, how can you not be? But there are people who aren't. Who was it? There's something I'm sure you had about people who, we know people don't read their notification letters. So, even if you put a strap line on there, don't forget or whatever, or the £20 increase. People don't even, and of course not everybody has got a £20 increase. The taper effect, the benefit cap, can sometimes mean that people have not seen any increase in their money. So actually they don't know that they're going to be disadvantaged.
And historically, of course, the rates of benefits, we've only seen one increase in the last almost 10 years, really, isn't it? It's real in real terms. So the value of benefit has been eroded in real terms over years.
The question is, most of that money, most of that £20 increase gets spent in the local economy as well. So really, it's coming back in some way to the Treasury.
And local authority, local economies that have obviously been quite badly affected over the last months with the pandemic. I mean, I'd be interested to know if any of the people at councils are actually proactively writing out and telling people about these sort of dangers. Is there a need to? Well, I suppose it's difficult again, but we all know that people do. If you write a long letter and one of the points is, even if it's highlighted at the top, it's difficult to get people to read. But just feels like things are going to be a bit bad in the next month or two.
Yes. Well, happy note there, Jake.
Yeah, happy note for your Tuesday morning. Are there any? Do we have any more questions, Nick, from our audience? Anybody putting their hands up?
No, very quiet today, Jake.
Quiet today. Perhaps it was a busy bank holiday weekend. I certainly went out and enjoyed myself. I think we're coming up to 35 minutes past, and when it comes down to it, there is not a lot else on my slides. So I think unless anybody's got any points that they'd really like to raise, we'll just leave everybody with that depressing view of the cost of living going up. And see how it impacts us over the coming weeks and months. Next week, of course, we should have Malcolm back with his tales from the International Association of Assessing Officers.
What does that mean?
It's literally like the IRRV. They do professional qualifications, and there's a lot of local government there. So obviously they don't have a universal welfare system, but there are sort of.
They are basically, because I went there in 2015 as president of the IRRV, that they don't do a national sort of valuation, but they are like the people who value for property taxes. So very much like the valuation arm of the IRRV.
Was it a good conference, Malcolm?
It was a very good conference. It was in a place called Indianapolis, which has that motor racing theme again.
You managed to volunteer there, Kevin.
I have tried, but COVID's very much put the rails on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I got an update from Malcolm this morning telling me that the food was quite nice. He made a disparaging comment about the sandwiches that you get at the IRRV versus the massive banqueting room with full.
The food, if I seem to remember, and age is catching up with me, the food was very nice, if I seem to remember there.
Always a bonus.
Always a bonus. Yeah. If anybody's got anything they'd like us to discuss, obviously, Malcolm, you can email Malcolm. We've also got recently set up mentioned that the Team Netzel channel for the YouTube videos, which will be uploading this session and last week's session, because I didn't get around to doing that, sorry. But if you ever want to watch the recordings, they're on the youtube.com/user/Team Netzel. But we also have the WhatsApp group. If anybody's interested in joining the WhatsApp group, there's been a few interesting articles shared recently, mostly around the cost of living and how it's going up. But we're always looking to get people to join that and give us ideas and things to discuss and get ready for next week when we'll come back with some more subjects. But I think today I've rattled through a couple of my slides a bit quick, so not as well practiced as Malcolm. I should have slowed down like he does and waffled a bit. But I think if there's no other questions, we'll bring it to a close today, and hopefully see you all the regular slot on Monday next week, back at 12 p.m. on a Monday.
Okay.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, come on.